Welcome back, MTG Joe here. We're here for another installment of the weekly meta breakdown where we look at the top performing decks on the MTG Arena ladder. Today's video is going to be focusing on the standard best of one format. If you're looking for best of three, if you're looking for the other formats, check out the playlist. We try to cover them once per week. I did put a note out in a standalone video, but just for folks, if you're catching this for the first time, I will be off in 2 weeks for surgery. I will be limited to no content for about 2 to 3 weeks afterwards as I go through recovery. So appreciate in advance if you can play any of my old videos in the background, just get some views to help with the algorithm while I'm off, but just kind of a content note that there'll be some outages in the next coming weeks. But let's jump into it. Untapped GG, what you see on the screen is where we're getting the data from. Companion tool that runs alongside of Arena Client, aggregates your win rates, tracks like all your changes and stuff, puts it with other users, gives us cool stats. Link for Untapped is in the video description, and I'll paste all these deck lists, timestamp them, the whole deal. We're going to start off with looking at popularity of the day, and then we'll also look at the last week worth of data from Diamond to Mythic rank. We're also going to take a look, so I'll be quite transparent. The best of one meta is fairly static. There hasn't been anything super dynamic, but with RCQ Regional Championship qualifiers being standard this season, there's been some innovation in the best of three space that could potentially be ported over. So I'm going to highlight 3 decks that are kind of the decks of the week that have been putting up results, whether it be MTGO leagues or just kind of new ideas that people are trying out for standard. Speaking of RCQs, if players are playing it and you've had success with a mono red list, please share, because I've got like 99% of the cards, and there's a lot of like 70 out of 75 cards are the same, and then people are just tweaking. I just want to get ready for my RC. If I do play in it, I'm actually playing in a team's trios, a team event for Ravnica Remastered Sealed next week, which is exciting. So let's play some Ravnica as a team event, hopefully qualify that way there. But we are going to jump in. So popularity of the day, the most popular deck, and kind of like clockwork, season resets. Everybody sleeves up their mono red decks and makes a push for the top of the ladder. So 25%. This meta is really boring to me, to be honest. It really needs the whole rotation, but neither here nor there. Azorius Control is the next deck at 7.6. Then we have Mono White Humans, 7%, Selesnya Enchantment, 6.2. We did have 2 versions of Mono Black that have made an appearance this week. So if you're a Mono Black lover, some decks here. Golgari Midrange always hovers around that 5 to 7% range, despite always being sub 50% in best of one. Grulegra for an Esper Control. The big kind of notables we're not going to highlight today. Selesnya Enchantments has dropped quite a bit, as well as the Golgari mid-range decks. You can see kind of the huge mono red was about 20%, shoots up to 31%, and then kind of normalizes as folks are continuing their grind. We do see a kind of a mini spike with mono black aggro. Could be a content creator put out something. Admittedly, I'm not heavily invested in standard content at this point. More on the timeless side for my consumption purposes. But if we're looking like dinosaurs has pretty much largely fallen off, the Boros like kind of human decks kind of shifted back to mono white. So we're seeing kind of a merger of kind of the tentpoles, mono red, Azorius Control, mono black, and then various white based aggro decks. So we are going to look Diamond to Mythic, December 31st through to the 7th of January, 36,000 games of Best of One Magic played. And somebody calls CGB because Azorius Control, top of the meta. And Sunfall gamers rejoice. Apparently this card spiked to like $10 in price. Even like a whole bunch. So I'm trying to find 2 Phoenix Chick in paper in Canada. And like there's one store that has it, but then they don't have Urbrask Forge, which is now like $7. Which is kind of nuts, but paper standard cards are spiking in price. Like it's like 2016 again. But back to the deck, 62%, 220 games. This is saying no multiple ways. And it's this version, I always kind of commend it because it's properly built, in my opinion, for a best of one meta. A lot of times people will think control and they put three mana counter spells, just a lot of glut which is fine in a sense against the domain decks, which you see more prevalently in the best of 3 format. But in best of 1, people are putting creatures down on turn 1, potentially 1-drop into 1-drop on turn 2. So having Elspeth Smite, March of Otherworldly Light, Fateful Absence, Soul Partition, Sunset Revelry, gain you some life, make you some tokens, all super reasonable. Again, playing to a creature meta, you have Depopulate, Sunfalls, and Farewell, just again controlling the board. The nice thing with Celestis, well, it does help you ramp into a turn 4 Sunfall. With the day-night cycle, it can help you loot and discard those cards you don't need. So if you are in a control mirror, you don't need these Depopulates, so you can get rid of them. You don't have the benefit of, for example, some of the extended formats where you have companions, where you can kind of judge, right? Like if you see a Karuga from your opponent's side of the board, you know that they're on a Discover combo or some sort of big mana combo. So you probably don't want Elspeth Smite, for example. Your win conditions for this deck, besides emotionally damaging your opponent, is Jace the Perfected Mind to mill your opponent. This is another card that went up to like $10. Wandering Emperor, as well as Sunfall tokens, Restless Anchorage, and no Myrex in this one. I always kind of check. Technically, your Sunset Revelry tokens can go the distance, but I imagine more than anything, your opponent's going to concede out of frustration prior to actually losing the game. We then go to mono white humans. So Return of Humans. I made the comment last week that we saw quite a bit of decline in this deck, but we're seeing it come up again. Could be that just the ladder reset, so folks are dusting off those Thalias in anticipation, but this is kind of the stock list. No splash for red for Yodian Recruiter, or I forget the name, not Yodian Recruiter, the red drop that gives haste. But Hopeful Initiates, Skrelves for protection, Recruitment Officer for card advantage, Lord effects in both Coppercoat Vanguard and Intrepid Adversary, the single copy of Guardian of Nubenalia as kind of pseudo-indestructible, removal in the form of Ossification as well as Brutal Cathar, Adelins full set, as well as Knight Errant of Eos to give you some more card advantage. Very simple mana base. You could probably get away with playing one creature land, the Forge, and then probably just one. Or you could play like a Myrex. I would just play like one utility land in addition. You have a Ganjo, but you can get away with it. Next up, Mishra's Foundry, not Forge, is what I meant. Mono Red Aggro, 59.2, so pretty much percentage point below. And this looks like a fairly stock list. The one thing that we're seeing with a lot of the best of 3 lists is Witchstalker Frenzy in the main. We're also seeing fewer copies of Swiftspear in lieu of Phoenix Chick, so slightly different configurations. This version here is trimming on the Bloodthirsty Adversaries. Still playing like 2 Feldons, the 3-2 split here. Personally, I would be more inclined to cut the Shivan Devastator and go up copies of Adversary. I think this card, more often than not, has a lot more utility. This card, I've never really liked it. It's not, you're not big enough mana, and to go like 3 mana for a 2-2 flying haste, it's pretty low effect. Like usually when we've seen those Phoenixes, like Chandra's Phoenix in the past, they have some sort of recursion or added value. If you're flooding out like to the point where this is relevant, you're probably going to be losing the game more often than not. And at the same time, you can always kick this Bloodthirsty Adversary. So this is a more meaningful play on 2. And then it's also like some utility later in the game. But removal would play with Fire and Lightning Strike. Monstrous Rage plays really nicely with your 1-drops, as well as a big Godric. And then Squee lets you go wide. Sokuzan, 2 Mishra's Boundaries as well. Now, we have 2 mono black decks. So the first one up, they're pretty much like 59 and I think 58%. So we'll take a look at both. We'll let you, the viewer, decide which one you want to sleeve up. But this one, they're calling it mono black aggro. I would not call it mono black aggro. I would call it mono black midrange to control. But you have a lot of removal early, cut downs, edicts, go for the throats, bitter triumph. Virtue of Persistence, Path to Peril as a cheap sweeper, notably no white mana unless you well-time a Myrex to kill everything. Trespassers, Liliana the Veils as your 3-drops, as well as Phyrexian Fleshgorger. While it's hanging out here, it should be a 3-drop, more often than not in the deck. Sheoldred, Sorin on the top end. A little interesting with Sorin, you're going to be plussing at times and taking upwards of 7 damage, so a little bit of a gamble on the top end, but the lifelink token can be very relevant. And then against control, this is a reasonable threat. Alcazot's another big lifelink attacker, gets hand hate, gets you some tokens. When it dies, it could come back. And of the gods, this one's the easiest to flip back in terms of the format. Ashiok, Wicked Manipulator. This card's seen little to no play. I don't think I've ever actually cast this card, so I don't have much of an opinion. Overall, it seems fairly weak in terms of a 5-mana play in the format. I would probably just play the other Flesh Gorger over it. So if you don't have it, if you have the Flesh Gorgers, play that. Even like another Trespasser. Just don't think this is doing enough in the deck. Gix Command is a sweeper, kind of rebuy, lifelink, Cruelty of Gix, Hand Hate, Reanimation, and then you can hard cast the Virtue side, Takenuma, 3 Myrics in the mana base. Then go to the second version. So this one I would say is more mono black aggro, and we're really separating by 0.3%. So this one, while you do have some of the removal of Cut Down and Bitter Triumph, you have your 1-drops and Evolved Sleeper that could get bigger, Okiba Reckoner Raid, Tenacious Underdog, you can discard to both Liliana and Bitter Triumph, so some value there. Then you have your Graveyard Trespassers, 2 Archfiends of Jaros as a big beater on the top, and full 4 Bloodletter of Alcots, doubling your damage, and then Shieldred, same Flesh Gorger, Virtue package. Myrex Foundry, Split, and then 1 Takenuma in the mana base. So kind of different elements depending on how you want to attack the meta. We then go to Rakdos Midrange, which is really Rakdos Ramp. There's a few different, there's like the Rakdos Discover lists, which are also getting popular in best of 3. But this version here is looking to leverage things like Ironcrag, Celestis, Big Score to allow you to go into like an early Shieldred, Itali, Breach the Multiverse. Ideally with Chandra out, you can double the Breach the Multiverse triggers and get 20 cards milled, get a whole bunch of value from your opponent. Early removal with Go for the Throat, Edict, Brotherhood's End, very good against a lot of these creature decks. More prevalent against mono red. Against mono white, while it does hit most of their creatures, Adeline does dodge it. But you have like Shieldred with like the Big Score package. Burn Down the House takes care of pretty much every creature deck, and notably Planeswalkers as well. So be a little bit cautious with Chandra. But this does kind of sweep the board while leaving your Archfiend behind or your Itali. Some copies of Virtue on the top end as well. Demolition Fields, Field of Ruins. To be honest, there's probably too many, for best of 1, too many of these type of effects. In this format, you're going to be running into a lot of mono decks, so these end up just being dead colored lands, and you really want to hit your colored lands in this deck. So I would suggest, at the very least, cut 3 to 4 of these and just play more basics. You want to be able to hit your colors. You can go Takenuma here, you can go Sulphur Springs. If you have the dual lands, I just think playing, like, well, maybe against Domain or like Esper Midrange, you're going to have a decent time. In this best of 1 format, you're probably going to suffer a little bit more. So, kind of porting over to best of 3, we've had a revival in Toxic decks. So the last MTGO leagues were littered with these Bant Toxic lists. So 5-0 list, this is a best of 3 list, but a lot of the ideas can be leveraged in best of 1, where this deck is fairly linear in terms, and we've seen at various points in the past that Toxic decks have been towards the top of the best of 1 meta. So this version here, Bant Blue, White, Green, you have Crawling Chorus, Jawbone Duelist, Skrell for protection and unblockable, and everyone's favorite Venerated Rot Priest. Reddit threads are being written as we speak about this should be banned because it's toxic. Slip out the back for protection, charge the mites as both removal and a way to create more toxic mites at instant speed. Augury proliferates and gets you some card advantage. Fading Hope for you can either bounce your opponent's things or bounce yours. With Venerated Rot Priest out, you do trigger. March of Swirling Mist is kind of a combo kill with Venerated Rot Priest, as well as protection. Serum's Snare as another bounce effect that proliferates. And then Skrell's Hive makes you more tokens. Once they're corrupted, you get lifelink. And then the only thing I would say with this, the mana base is a little rough with 3 colors, but you're leveraging things like the Seed Core here for your various Phyrexian creatures. 3 Myrex in here as well. So there's a sideboard if you're interested. So there's that version of Toxic, and then there's a mono white, slightly more controlling version that also went 5-0 and had a couple of good results. Similar concept in your creatures. You have Annex Sentry in the main as some removal. Your Crawling Chorus, Jawbone, Skrells. charge the mites, as well as destroy evil. Then you have some sweepers in this one with expel the interlopers, as well as White Sun's Twilight. Notably, White Sun's does create tokens if you get it up high enough. This version's got a lot more interaction for your opponents with laydown arms, ossification, and this guy got some cool combos with so full Scroll of Hives. Toskia's Welcome in here. So every turn a creature comes into play, you get the Toskia Welcome. I don't know why it's not coming up. Toskia's Welcome to draw you a card. So kind of an interesting engine there. Full Myrex, full Seed Core, 17 planes. So if you want to go a little bit more controlling, that's an option there. And then lastly, the blue-white Monastery Mentor decks. Crowd favorite Monastery Mentor. The biggest issue with Mentor is it's 3 mana that usually then just dies before you can get it going. But this version here is combining kind of the essence of that mono blue tempo deck with Haughty Djinn, Picklock Prankster. You're self-milling yourself, so you have Philaji Archaeologist, the Picklock Prankster. So think of it almost like a Phoenix deck. You're self-milling, you have considered to put cards in the graveyard, Otherworldly Gaze, and then what you're trying to do is use either Helping Hand or Recommission to reanimate the Monastery Mentor for 1 or 2 mana. And then you can just cast more spells, get a bunch of tokens, kill your opponent that way there. That's it for the week. Let me know what you've been playing. And like I said, if you have any good best of 3 mono red decks that you've done well at an RCQ with, let me know in the comments so I can copy your homework and not have to figure it out myself. Thanks for watching. Hope you have a great one. Stay safe out there.